Kael Dorn had spent 3 years dreaming of this moment, standing face to face with the alien princess who tore his brother's life away. He had the gun. He had the reason. So why the hell couldn't he pull the trigger? The cave swallowed them in a wet, shallow darkness, the ceiling dripping with moisture from the jungle storms outside. Every sound was too loud, the rasp of Kael's breathing, the quiet click of his finger flexing against the trigger guard, the faint, ragged breath of the woman slumped against the far wall. Vaela. The infamous princess of Elyra. The architect of his brother's death. At least, that's what every report, every propaganda reel, and every drunken retelling around a Terran army fire pit said. Now, she looked nothing like the creature he had imagined, no gleaming armor, no bloodthirsty sneer. Just a figure cloaked in grime and sweat, her silver-white hair matted against a gash above her brow, her breathing shallow and labored. Kael lowered the gun, cursing under his breath. The faint light from the emergency beacon flickered against the cave walls, painting her alien features in an eerie glow, the high cheekbones, the faintly luminous markings along her temples, the pride still etched into her two sharp eyes. "You gonna shoot or just stand there breathing like a dying cow?" she rasped, voice like torn silk. Kael flinched, the absurdity of it breaking the tight knot in his chest for half a second. He shoved the pistol back into his holster, stepping closer to the small sputtering fire he'd managed to coax from the damp underbrush. "If I wanted you dead," he muttered, "you wouldn't be breathing right now." Vaela's lip curled, more in disdain than gratitude. She shifted slightly, a wince carving across her proud features, but otherwise refused to acknowledge her injury. "Pity," she said flatly. "It would save me the humiliation of dying slowly in a human's prison." Kael tossed another scrap of dry moss onto the fire. Sparks leapt up like desperate prayers. "You think too highly of yourself," he said, not looking at her. "You're not worth the paperwork." A brittle silence stretched between them, filled only by the slow drip-drip of condensation from the rocks above. Outside, something howled, a low, wet sound that crawled under Kael's skin. He glanced at her again. She was trembling. Not from fear, no, he didn't believe Vaela Tsari feared anything. It was fever. The wound on her side was seeping through the makeshift bandage she'd wrapped herself in. Left alone, she wouldn't survive the night. Not that it was his problem. Kael dug through his survival pack anyway, cursing himself the entire time. He pulled out a protein ration and a small vial of antibiotics, setting them on the stone floor halfway between them like offerings to a wild animal. Vaela's eyes flicked to them, then back to him, glittering with contempt. "I would rather starve," she hissed in her own tongue, the meaning clear even if the words weren't. Kael shrugged. "Suit yourself." He sat back, arms resting loosely over his knees, watching the tiny flame dance between them. His instincts screamed at him to keep his hand close to his weapon, but another voice, quieter, nastier, whispered that she wasn't a threat anymore. "Not like this." "Why?" she asked suddenly. Kael raised an eyebrow. "Why not finish it?" she pressed, her voice cracking from dryness but still carrying that edge of bitter pride. "Is this some human sense of mercy? Or do you wish to savor your victory longer?" He leaned back against the cold rock wall, letting his head thump lightly against it. "Maybe," he said slowly, I'm just tired of killing. Vaela snorted a humorless laugh, coughing weakly afterward. The fire popped, sending a brief shower of embers into the stale air. In the flickering light, Kael could see the sharp lines of her face soften, not in surrender, but in exhaustion. Whatever fire had driven her to command fleets and shatter cities was guttering out. Maybe it should have made him feel triumphant. Instead, it made him feel sick. Kael grabbed the antibiotics and, without a word, crawled a few steps to her side. Vaela tensed as he approached, her muscles coiling in futile resistance. "Relax," he muttered. "I'm not poisoning you." "You could," she rasped. "I could," he agreed. He uncapped the vial and offered it to her. After a long moment, her hand, trembling, blood-smeared, but still steady, reached out and snatched it from him like a feral cat. She drank it down in one gulp, grimacing. Kael returned to his spot by the fire, feeling the weight of her gaze digging into his back. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Time was strange here, measured only by the soft crackle of burning wood and the occasional scream of some unseen predator outside. Eventually, her voice drifted across the space between them, softer now. What was his name? Kael didn't have to ask who she meant. He stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "Evan," he said. "Evan Dorn." Vaela said nothing, but the tension in the cave shifted, like the air itself held its breath. Kael closed his eyes. Saw Evan's grin, the stupid way he'd worn his helmet crooked, the way he'd always volunteered for the worst jobs just to spare someone else. The gun was still at his hip. It would be so easy. So why couldn't he hate her enough to pull it? Maybe because the woman across from him wasn't the monster from the stories. Maybe because in the dying firelight, she looked just as lost as he felt. The rain came down in thick, hissing sheets, turning the entrance of the cave into a glistening curtain of acid droplets. Kael watched it from his seat by the fire, every now and then hearing the faint sizzle of rain hitting stone. The storm was going nowhere. Neither were they. Behind him, Vaela stirred, her breathing shallow but steadier than the night before. The antibiotics were working, or at least keeping her alive a little longer. Kael's mind wasn't on the storm or the fire. It was on the scrap of metal he'd found earlier while foraging supplies from the wreckage. A broken insignia, half melted, but the crest was unmistakable, a star wrapped in a serpent. Royal seal of House Tsari. Her house. He turned it over in his hand, feeling the edges bite into his palm. Princess Vaela Tsari. The name was legend and curse both. The girl who had stood atop a balcony of burning ruins, hailed as a savior by her people even as Terran colonies burned. And she was lying 20 feet away from him, sick, wounded, and stubborn as hell. "So," he said without looking at her, his voice dry as the cave air. "Should I call you Your Highness? Or does war criminal work better?" There was a pause. Then a brittle laugh that cracked like thin ice. "Call me whatever suits you, soldier," Vaela said, voice raspy but defiant. Kael turned, his hand tightening around the insignia. He tossed it across the fire. It landed with a metallic clink at her feet. "Found that near the wreckage," he said. "Figured you'd want it." Vaela didn't move to pick it up. Her crimson eyes, duller now from fever but still sharp, locked onto his. "You know who I am," she said. Kael smiled without humor. "Took me long enough." Another silence settled, heavier this time. The kind filled with things unsaid. "You killed him," Kael said quietly, the words tasting like ash. Vaela's brow furrowed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her gaze dropped to the insignia. "I don't," she began, then stopped. Shook her head slightly as if fighting through a fog. Kael leaned forward, the firelight throwing hard shadows across his face. "Battle of Hallow Reach," he said, voice low. "Third Colony Station." Civilian evacuations were still underway. "You gave the order." Vaela pressed a shaking hand against her temple, her expression tightening. "I remember. Fire," she whispered. Screams. Confusion. Kael's hand twitched toward his holster. His brother's last transmission haunted his ears. Screams. Static. A half-finished cry for help. "Don't," Vaela said, so quietly he almost missed it. He froze, fingers inches from the weapon. "If you're going to kill me," she rasped, "do it clean. Don't wallow in it." Her eyes met his again, and for the first time, Kael saw something beneath the defiance. Guilt. Real. Raw. Unfeigned. It hit him harder than any weapon could have. He sat back with a bitter curse, scrubbing his hands over his face. The cave smelled of wet stone and smoke and anger. Vaela sagged against the wall, eyes closing for a moment as if even speaking had drained what little strength she had. Kael hated her. God, he wanted to hate her. But the image in his mind wasn't the villain from Terran broadcasts. It was this broken creature before him, not a princess, not a monster. Just a woman with too much blood on her hands and not enough left in her body. "I dream," she said suddenly, voice no more than a breath, "of a man pulling me from rubble. Human armor. Blue eyes. He carried me away from the fires." Kael stiffened. "Was it a dream?" she asked, turning her head slightly toward him. "Or was it you?" He said nothing. The rain pounded harder, a roaring backdrop to the silence between them. Memories he had buried deep surged up, unbidden. The rescue ops he'd led on Hallow Reach, the girl he'd dragged from a collapsing school before the final bombardment. He hadn't looked at her face. Hadn't wanted to know. But now. "You should hate me," Vaela whispered. Kael laughed, a hollow sound. "I'm trying." She shivered, curling in on herself as another wave of fever racked her body. Kael hesitated, then pulled another ration from his pack, along with a small fever suppressant. He tossed them toward her. They landed near the insignia. Vaela stared at them for a long moment, then back at him. "What game are you playing, Terran?" she asked. "No game," he said wearily. "Just survival." She laughed again, bitter and broken. "Survival," she echoed. "That's all any of us ever had, wasn't it?" Kael leaned back against the cave wall, closing his eyes. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the fire sputtered and fought for life, much like the two souls trapped within a stone tomb. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew that tonight, he wouldn't kill her. Not yet. The first warning was the low hum slicing through the thick jungle air. Kael's head snapped up, eyes narrowing against the crimson light bleeding across the sky. A Terran patrol drone. Bigger trouble wasn't far behind. "Move," he barked, already grabbing the few supplies they'd scrounged. Vaela struggled upright, swaying. She caught herself against the wall with a grimace but said nothing. Pride, stubborn and sharp-edged, carried her where strength had failed. Kael offered his hand. She stared at it for a heartbeat too long before ignoring it and pushing forward on her own. Outside, the world was bleeding. The rain had died, but the clouds hung low, glowing a sickly red from the engines of the descending Terran skimmers. The ground shook under the roar. They ran. Kael knew they wouldn't outrun the patrol ships for long. He led her through twisted undergrowth, over fallen trees, weaving toward a darker shape looming against the burning sky, the ruins. The place was ancient, bones of some long-dead civilization. Broken pillars jutted from the earth like snapped spears. Carvings, half eaten by moss and time, whispered stories in languages neither of them knew. Vaela stumbled. Kael caught her this time, steadying her without thinking. Her skin was burning hot against his. "Keep moving," he muttered. "Almost there." A screech split the air. Not from the ships. From the jungle. Kael turned just in time to see it burst from the trees, a massive creature armored in gleaming black plates, with 6 legs pounding the ground and a mouth full of serrated teeth. "On me," he shouted, drawing his rifle. Vaela didn't hesitate. She grabbed a shard of broken metal from the ruins, the jagged edge humming faintly as she channeled some unseen energy through it. The beast charged. Kael fired. The rounds pinged uselessly off its armor. It reared, shrieking, and slammed a clawed limb toward him. He rolled aside, feeling the ground quake with the impact. Vaela moved like a blade, no wasted motion. She ducked under the beast's swing and drove her makeshift weapon into a seam between the plates. The creature roared, staggering. "There!" Kael shouted, spotting the exposed joint. Together, they attacked. Kael emptied a clip into the wound while Vaela tore at it with savage precision. Blood, thick and oily, sprayed the ruins. Finally, with a shuddering wail, the monster collapsed. Kael stood over it, chest heaving. His hands were slick with sweat and blood. Across from him, Vaela leaned against a broken pillar, her own face pale and streaked with grime. For a moment, neither spoke. The sky blazed red above them, the air thick with smoke and adrenaline. Kael crossed the distance between them without thinking. He pressed a hand against her arm, checking for wounds. "You're bleeding," he said gruffly. Vaela gave a weak laugh. "So are you." He realized she was right. Blood soaked through his sleeve, but he couldn't feel it. They slid down the pillar together, collapsing into the dirt. Shoulder to shoulder. Breathing like they'd run for years. Kael looked over at her. For the first time, he didn't see an enemy. He saw a fighter. A survivor. Someone who, against all odds, had fought beside him instead of against him. Vaela turned her head, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were weary but unflinching. Kael felt something shift inside him. Something dangerous. He should have been planning their next move, scanning for more threats. Instead, he noticed the way her silver hair clung to her forehead. The faint tremble in her hands. The way her mouth, so often set in a hard line, softened at the corners when she breathed. He wanted to reach out. To touch her. To anchor himself to something real in a world that had spun so violently out of control. But he didn't. Vaela broke the moment first. She shifted, wincing, and drew her knees up to her chest. "You should leave me," she said quietly. "Save yourself." Kael snorted. "Not a chance." Her fingers tightened around her makeshift weapon. "If they catch you, then we'll fight," he said simply. The flicker of something crossed her face: fear, gratitude, despair. Maybe all three. Above them, the skimmers circled, searchlights slicing through the broken canopy. But for now, they were hidden. Safe. Together. Kael closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the pillar. He didn't know how this ended. Probably badly. But in that blood-soaked ruin, under a sky that burned like the end of the world, Kael Dorn chose. He chose her. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like freedom. The abandoned COMM station rose out of the jungle like a broken tooth, half swallowed by vines and rust. Its signal dish still turned lazily toward the sky, broadcasting a faint, flickering beacon. Hope for one side. A death sentence for the other. Kael and Vaela crouched at the edge of the clearing, breathless, watching the skeletal structure pulse with sickly blue light. "That's our ticket off this rock," Kael said, voice low. Vaela didn't answer. She was staring at her wrist unit, a flickering hologram dancing across her bruised skin. A message. Kael caught the symbols flashing before she closed it with a trembling hand. Aelian script. He didn't need a translator to know it wasn't good. His own COMM crackled to life. A burst of encrypted orders from Terran High Command. Hold the princess. Secure the asset. Extraction imminent. He clenched his jaw. His fingers itched toward the rifle slung across his back. Across the clearing, Vaela stiffened. Her hand brushed the hilt of the shard knife she'd scavenged. The message from her side must have been clear too. Kill him. Come home. All will be forgiven. Kael rose slowly. Vaela mirrored him. Two figures in the pale glow of the failing machine, guns, and blades and history weighing them down. "You got your orders," Kael said, voice rough. Vaela nodded once, the movement sharp, mechanical. "So do I," he said. Silence. Thick enough to choke on. The air between them stretched tight, like a wire ready to snap. Kael unhooked his rifle. Vaela drew her blade. He stared at her across the clearing, remembering the girl half dead in the cave, the fighter by his side in the ruins. The woman who haunted his dreams now more fiercely than any ghost of the past. Vaela's eyes shimmered. Whether from rage or sorrow, he couldn't tell. "If you're going to do it," she said hoarsely, "make it quick." Kael raised his weapon. For a heartbeat, everything in him screamed to pull the trigger. Justice. Duty. vengeance. Instead, with a rough curse, he ripped the rifle from his hands and hurled it into the dirt. Vaela flinched. Kael stepped forward, empty hands raised. "I'm done fighting ghosts," he said. Vaela's blade trembled. "They will kill you," she whispered. "Both sides. Then let them try." Her face crumpled. The first tear slipped down her cheek, tracing a line through the grime. Kael's chest tightened painfully. She lowered the knife. It clattered to the stone floor, forgotten. For a moment, they simply stood there, breathing hard, surrounded by the wreckage of what their lives had been. The COMM station crackled again, its beam lashing into the sky. Without a word, Kael crossed the clearing, ripped open the access panel, and tore the core from its socket. The signal died with a stuttering gasp. Vaela sank to her knees. Kael crouched beside her, one hand hovering over her shoulder, unsure if he had the right to touch her. She turned her face up to him, raw and open in a way no battlefield could ever strip bare. "What now?" she asked. Kael offered a crooked, tired smile. "Now," he said, "we survive." The stars blinked overhead, distant and uncaring. Two fugitives. Two traitors. Two broken souls bound together not by blood or allegiance, but by choice. By the impossible, stubborn choice to walk away from the wars that made them. Side by side, they disappeared into the shattered jungle. The machine behind them sparked and died, leaving only the darkness and the faint, reckless hope of something better waiting beyond it. The wreck of the old shuttle loomed ahead, half buried in vines and moss, its hull scorched and broken. It wasn't much, but it was a way off this dying world. If it still worked. Kael stumbled as they reached it, catching himself against the frame. Vaela hurried to his side, her heart lurching at the sight of him. His skin was too pale. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. The wound he'd taken back at the ruins was worse than he'd let on. Much worse. She caught him under the arms, half carrying, half dragging him up the battered ramp. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust floated in thick beams of light slicing through the cracks in the hull. Terminals blinked weakly, protesting as she slammed her hand against the activation panel. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on." The engines coughed, then sputtered to life, bathing the hold in a sickly blue glow. "Systems online." "Barely." Kael sagged against the wall, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Told you, it'd fly," he rasped. Vaela pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. "Burning." She grabbed the medkit from the wall and ripped it open, finding only a few withered supplies left. Nothing that could stop what was happening inside him. The infection was too deep. The damage too much. "Save your strength," she said, voice thick. Kael shook his head weakly. His hand fumbled at the battered day-top pad strapped to his belt. "Here," he croaked. "Take it." Vaela hesitated, then took it from him. The screen flickered to life, showing files. Reports. Images. Names. Evidence. Proof of the atrocities committed by both sides. Her people. His people. All of it. "Truth," he whispered. "You have to tell them, all of it." Viola's throat tightened. "I'm not strong enough," she said, the words ripping out of her. Kael managed a crooked, broken smile. "You are," he said. "You always were." Tears blurred her vision. She dropped to her knees beside him, cradling his face between her hands. "Stay," she begged. He reached up, tracing the line of her jaw with trembling fingers. "Always," he murmured. And then she kissed him. Soft. Desperate. Final. He kissed her back, what little strength he had left pouring into that moment. Into her. When she pulled away, his eyes were glassy but still focused on her. Still seeing her. "Go," he said. She shook her head. "Not without you?" Kael gave a faint, broken laugh. "You're not leaving me," he whispered. "I'm already gone." His body sagged against hers, the fight leaving him all at once. Vaela pressed her forward to his, breathing him in. Memorizing. Then, with shaking hands, she lifted him into the cryopod. Sealed it. Watched as frost crept over the glass, locking him in a sleep he'd never wake from. The ship groaned around her as she set the coordinates for orbit. For safety. For escape. She sat in the pilot's chair, the daytop hat clutched to her chest, and watched the ground fall away beneath her. Watched very uneasy shrink into nothingness. Silent tears streamed down her face. No screams. No wails. Only the soft, steady rhythm of a broken heart carrying a legend home. She looked out at the stars, the endless black waiting for her. "I will tell them," she whispered. The stars did not answer. But she imagined Kael's voice somewhere out there, steady and certain. She closed her eyes, feeling the ship hum under her hands, and made a promise. "I will tell your story. Not as a soldier. Not as a killer. But as the man who was brave enough to stop. The man who had taught her that some wars weren't won by fighting. They were won by choosing to lay down the sword."